The Culture of Violence by Francis Barker is a book that explores the collusion between culture and political power and social inequality in early modern England. Barker argues that this collusion has been obscured by contemporary criticism's tendency to flatten time and deny the historicity of both its objects of analysis and its own interpretive practices. This tendency can be observed in deconstruction's willingness to abolish historical difference in the name of generalized textuality, as well as new historicism's descriptive form of cultural interpretation. The book is impressive in its nuanced readings of 16th and 17th century texts, particularly William Shakespeare's plays. It provides an important contribution to our understanding of early modern England, the postmodern end of history, contemporary cultural theory, and the forms that a historical literary criticism might take. Barker's analysis of the tragic in King Lear, Hamlet, and Macbeth comprises almost half of the book and provides its organizing focus. Shakespearean tragedy is crucial because it shares with the postmodern condition an analogous system of denial. By announcing the end or impossibility of history, both unwittingly figure their own historicity, their existence during the demise of one powerful version of what counts as history and the beginning of others. In other words, Shakespeare's tragedies are illustrative as much for what they attempt to deny as for their inadvertent and intrinsic failure. Borrowing Shakespeare's tragedies might help us analyze the early modern past and inhabit the postmodern present critically and historically, not as a mysterious or unchanging condition, but as a crisis. By assuming that reinterpreting Shakespeare's tragedies might help us analyze the early modern past and inhabit the postmodern present critically and historically, Barker emphasizes the potential connections among literary criticism, culture, and violence. Barker's book explores the connections between deconstruction and new historicism in early modern studies, focusing on Areopagitica and the Leviathan in his third chapter, and Titus Andronicus in his fourth. The third chapter traces the transition from figures of true discourse, as a powerful form of political action, to the assumption that true discourse is impossible to figure, because it is abstracted from the contingencies of power and political action. This latter rightly disavowal of any connection between discourse and social violence underscores the dilemma offered by the notions of textual indeterminacy, slippage, limitless semiosis, free circulation or play on one hand, and the closure of historicization on the other. Barker's readings of John Milton and Thomas Hobbes emphasize the violence entailed in forgetting the degree to which patterns of closure and slippage are textually intrinsic and historically determinate. However, deconstruction has had a relatively limited influence in early modern studies, and Renaissance critics who have used its emphasis on textual indeterminacy and slippage to greatest effect have also consistently focused on the connections between textuality and historicality, most recently in discussions about the early modern production of gender, race, and sexuality. Barker's remarks about deconstruction are directed less at a Derridian notion of difference than at the contemporary positive ethics or aesthetics of unqualified difference that surfaces often incoherently in new historicism. In his fourth chapter, Barker emphasizes how spectacles of exotic violence in Titus Andronicus obscure more widespread forms of violence, such as hanging, through which the state eliminated a significant portion of the early modern English population. These exotic spectacles are part of the anthropological double gesture through which the player locates violence elsewhere, beyond the boundaries of civilization, and at the same time domesticates that violence by rendering it merely theatrical. Barker's discussion of this theatrical model of power is sometimes misleading, insisting that new historicism denies the state's routine use of repressive force, and encouraging a false opposition between his own tendency to read for symptomatic, and the new historicist's tendency to read for visible effects of power. However, Barker's large argument that the descriptive and culturalist character of new historicism leaves it ill-equipped to analyze the uneven relationships between political and cultural realms, and among different forms of political power, could be extended to forms of power that do not rely on visible political coercion, including capitalist economic exploitation.